You're making a mistake. High Chancellor Ovildornis's voice was deliberate, weighted with the authority of 1,000 conquered civilizations. His elongated pupils, dark as void fissures, flickered under the council chamber's unforgiving light. The words weren't a plea, nor a warning, just cold certainty, spoken like gravity itself. Ambassador Cedric Tanor folded his hands on the polished obsidian table, the sheen of its surface reflecting the towering alien figures surrounding him. The chamber felt engineered to remind lesser species of their place. Ceilings stretching endlessly overhead, the walls carved with symbols of past assimilations, the air thick with the biting metallic tang of sterile filtration. It was a temple of submission, built by those who had never been told no, but that word had just been spoken. "You mistake our patience for hesitation," Tanor said, voice smooth, even. He leaned back, offering the faintest of smiles. "We heard your terms, Chancellor, and we refused." Silence rolled through the chamber like a storm front, stifling the quiet whispers of delegates, who until that moment had believed in their own dominion. High Chancellor Dornis's fingers flexed against the table's edge, his gossamer robes shifting with an irritated twitch. The council chamber of the Galactic Concord had witnessed countless negotiations, but never a species walking away, never a species rejecting them. "You cannot be serious." Dornis's disbelief was a brittle thing, cracking with barely restrained fury. "Every civilization that stands today has bent the knee," Tanor finished for him, voice neither mocking nor reverent, just an observation, a fact that had governed the stars for millennia. He glanced around at the gathered officials, some bristling, others visibly shaken, as if this moment shattered the very laws of reality. "But we are not every civilization." A quiet shift of weight beside him. Admiral Rain Voss, standing like a monolith of steel and bone, his uniform crisp, unadorned as though war itself had no need for embellishment. His gaze remained locked on the Concord's military representatives, reading them as one might read the undercurrents of a brewing storm. "We extended our hand," Dornis pressed, standing now, his forearms splaying wide, a calculated gesture of dominance. "We offered guidance, stability. You offered chains." The Chancellor fled. Not visibly, not outwardly, but it was there, a fracture in his certainty, a hesitation in his breath. Tanor let the silence stretch, knowing that in the emptiness between words, truths became inescapable. At last Dornis spoke, softer this time. "You are alone. Without our protection, without our resources, you will find the void unforgiving." Tanor exhaled slowly, as if weighing a decision far beyond this moment. Then he stood smoothing his coat, a quiet finality in his movements. "We'll manage." The human delegation moved in, practiced synchrony, rising to leave, the scrape of chairs against polished stone, the only sound in the oppressive chamber. No shouting, no protests, no pleading, just a quiet, absolute certainty that sent something cold slithering through the gathered alien spines. At the threshold, Tanor paused, half turning. "Chancellor," he said, his tone polite, almost an afterthought. "When your historians record this day, ensure they do so accurately." The Concord did not cast humanity out. His gaze swept across the assembled leaders, locking onto each of them for a heartbeat. "We walked away, and then they were gone." The silence left in their wake was more suffocating than any battle cry. Marshal Uther Ekshon's mandibles clicked in frustration as he watched the exodus unfold. Fleet after fleet, human colonies, shedding their presence like a snake, discarding its old skin. It was not a retreat, not the desperate scrambling of a species cut off from resources. It was something else, something methodical. "They're erasing themselves," Director Kexis, Vorn whispered, staring at the projected holofeed, her slit-pupilled eyes narrowing. Around her, the intelligence war room buzzed with frantic energy. Officers sifting through data streams, reports stacking by the minute. But no matter how many analysis programs were run, no matter how many simulations were tested, the conclusion was the same: humanity was vanishing. Orbital stations abandoned, not in haste, but with surgical precision. No salvageable data left behind, no blueprints, no infrastructure that could be repurposed. Entire planetary networks wiped clean, leaving nothing but inert husks of civilization, where thriving human settlements had stood just days before. "This isn't desperation," Shone growled, his secondary arms tightening into fists. "This is control. A sudden alert blared across the chamber. One of the deep space probes, assigned to track outbound human vessels, had sent back its final transmission before going dark. A set of coordinates. They weren't heading toward any known habitable systems, not toward allies, not toward resources. They were headed for the galactic rim. High Chancellor Dornis stood at the panoramic window of his private chambers, watching as the stars churned beyond the Concord capital world. His own reflection stared back at him, his features taut with something he refused to name. "They've gone mad," Ambassador Tralix Sharon murmured from behind him. "No species has ever abandoned known space. What do they think they'll find out there?" Dornis said nothing. He didn't know the answer, and that was the part that unsettled him most. A faint chime signaled an incoming report. He turned, gesturing for the display to activate. The moment he read the contents, something heavy settled in his chest. Every attempt to track the humans had resulted in blackouts. Probes ceased transmitting. Surveillance networks suffered inexplicable failures. Entire fleets assigned to monitoring had returned with no useful intelligence. Humanity wasn't just leaving. They were making sure no one could follow. And for the first time in his long, calculated rule, High Chancellor Dornis felt the creeping edges of uncertainty. Marshal Utherek Schoen's voice was a low growl as he issued the order. "Dispatch a fleet, a small one. We don't engage, we observe, find out what they're hiding." Director Kexis Forn said nothing for a long moment. Her gaze locked on the tracking feeds, each one flickering with interference, like ghosts slipping between the cracks of reality. "They aren't hiding," she murmured at last, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "They're shedding their old skin." She turned to Jean, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in her long career, she admitted what no one in the Concord wanted to acknowledge. "We don't understand what they're becoming." And that, more than anything, was what terrified her. Darkness stretched beyond the observation panels, the kind that swallowed stars whole. The Vanguard, last of Earth's high command warships still lingering within Concord-controlled space, moved without a sound. Inside, Admiral Rain Voss stood with his hands locked behind his back, his stance rigid as the control deck pulsed with quiet urgency. 37 colonies have gone dark," Commander Jareth Rand murmured beside him, his face dimly illuminated by the shifting tactical displays. "No outbound transmissions, no distress calls, not even civilian chatter. They just disappeared." The Admiral's jaw tightened, not disappeared, withdrawn. Silence thickened between them. The bridge crew worked with methodical urgency, relaying reports, decoding encrypted bursts from Earth's evacuation network. The tension in the air was like metal under stress, moments from snapping. A tactical officer spoke up, his voice clipped. "Surveillance drones from the Concord are advancing into the Erebus Drift, former human territory. They're running high-spectrum scans. Let them look," Voss said. His voice carried the weight of something deeper than defiance. Rand's fingers ghosted over the holographic projection of Earth's outer defense network. "They'll notice the shift soon. It won't take them long to realize that we're not just abandoning worlds, we're scrubbing them clean." "Then we hold formation," Voss said. "We don't interfere, not yet." The ship's artificial gravity recalibrated as the Vanguard adjusted its position. Far below, the last wave of evacuation ships launched from the surface of Kepler 9, a human stronghold now on its final cycle of deconstruction. Cities once brimming with energy were now ghostly skeletons of what had been, entire skylines erased, as though they had never existed. Tanner's voice crackled over the encrypted channel. "We're in motion. Final exit confirmed." "Copy that," Voss replied. His voice remained even, but something colder lurked beneath. He turned toward the primary viewing panel, watching the hollowed-out remnants of human civilization fade into the black. This was not defeat. This was the art of being unseen. At the edge of the Vanguard's sensor range, an anomaly flickered. A Concord scout vessel slithering through the silence, its scanners sweeping hungrily over the deserted colony. "The first of many," Voss exhaled slowly. "They're coming," Jareth let out a low breath. "And they don't even realize they've already lost." Marshal Utherek Zahn studied the incoming data stream with the scrutiny of a predator examining wounded prey. His war room was a fortress of layered holoscreens, real-time intelligence weaving intricate patterns of movement and analysis across the curved chamber walls. He barely heard the murmur of his subordinates discussing fleet deployment. His focus remained locked on the irregularity of the human withdrawal. Explain it to me, Zahn demanded, eyes flicking toward his intelligence chief. Why erase everything? Why leave nothing behind? Not even infrastructure? Director Kexis Vorn hesitated before speaking. A strategy of denial, perhaps. They want to prevent us from reverse engineering their advances. Zahn's gaze darkened. Or they don't intend to return at all. A hush settled over the chamber. The thought was absurd. No species willingly left the cradle of their established dominion, not without a larger plan in motion. Have we retrieved anything from their abandoned settlements? Zahn pressed. Vorn's throat tightened. No. Every attempt to extract data has resulted in automated system failures. Their security failsafes trigger instant destruction protocol. He tapped a control panel, bringing up a looping hollow feed of a Concord landing crew, attempting to access a former human data hub. The moment their equipment made contact with the terminal, the entire complex folded inward, imploding without so much as a trace left behind. Zahn's jaw locked. They're not just leaving, they're making sure we learn nothing in their absence. Chancellor Oval Dornis's image flickered into existence at the head of the war room. Marshal, our observation fleets have identified large-scale human fleet movements at the Galactic Rim. Explain. Zahn barely concealed his frustration. They're retreating, but the pattern suggests controlled positioning. They're not dispersing. They're consolidating. Dornis's gaze sharpened. Then we send a fleet after them, find out where they are going. Zahn didn't argue. He merely turned toward Admiral Valentzar, the Concord's most capable hunter. Deploy a pursuit fleet, Zahn ordered. Find them, track them. I don't care what it takes. Do not lose their trail. Sar's expression was unreadable. And if they don't want to be followed, Sar's voice was steel, then we'll see just how far they're willing to run. Admiral Voss stood at the Strategic Command Station, the vanguard now drifting along the silent edge of humanity's last recorded position within the Concord's recognized borders. A low signal pulsed across the secured comms. The second phase had begun. Tanner's voice was measured as it filtered through. Concord forces are moving in. Predictable formation patterns. They've taken the bait. A ghost of satisfaction flickered in Voss's expression. The Concord's arrogance blinded them. They saw only the void left behind, not the spaces where the unseen lingered. Let them believe they are pursuing us, Voss said. We'll guide them to where we want them to be. Jareth exhaled, leaning back. A chase they don't realize they've already lost. Below them, the darkness of uncharted space loomed. Not a void, not an escape. A battlefield. And the Concorde had just stepped into it without realizing the war had already begun. Darkness swallowed the Concorde pursuit fleet as it advanced beyond charted space, its formation a disciplined spear cutting toward the last known trajectory of the human exodus. Admiral Valentzar sat rigid in the command chair of the Vindicator, his gaze fixed on the growing emptiness ahead. No beacons, no debris, not even a distorted signal. Humanity had left nothing but ghost trails behind them. And yet something felt wrong. Scanners report no gravitational anomalies ahead, a technician announced, his voice edged with unease. No planetary bodies, no radiation pockets. Sar exhaled through his nose. The silence was unnatural. Maintain formation, he ordered. Deploy long-range probes. I want confirmation they're out there. The bridge crew moved with drilled efficiency, but the tension clawed at them. It had been weeks since the fleet set out. Yet with every passing hour it felt less like a pursuit and more like walking into a blind corridor with no exit. The first probe launched, its data feed streaming directly to the fleet. Seconds passed, then minutes, then static. Signal lost, the technician reported, hands stiff over his console. Sar's fingers dug into the armrest. Deploy another. The second probe launched. Same path, same outcome, gone. A weighted silence filled the bridge. There's nothing out here, an officer muttered. No one corrected him. Sar leaned forward. Launch a third. This time set the telemetry to scan for non-visible wavelength. Another tense pause. The probe streaked into the void. Data streamed in waves, painting the unseen. Then suddenly, a signal returned. A pulse, faint, directionless. The bridge crew exchanged wary glances. Sar's pulse quickened. Identify the source. The readouts twisted in real time, recalibrating. Then the feed twisted, fractured, collapsed. Lost it. The officer scrambled to restore the link, fingers flying across control. Tsar felt it then, a cold certainty pressing against his thoughts. They weren't alone. The feeling settled into his chest like a stone. All ships defensive formation. Activate counter-stealth array. The Concord warships adjusted, their angular hulls shifting as active sensors swept across the unseen. The darkness revealed nothing, but something was there, watching, waiting. In the command chamber of the Vanguard, Admiral Rain Voss watched the slow movements of the Concord fleet with detached amusement. Their hesitating Commander Jareth Ran observed, studying the sensor echoes. "You were right. They're not built for this kind of war. They don't understand the absence of control," Voss murmured. "Not yet." Beneath them, the Exodus fleet remained silent in the shadow of the artificial eclipse, a dead zone in space where no light could escape, where gravity distorted in ways that defied ordinary physics. The perfect hunting ground. Tanner's voice broke through the secured channel. "Tsar's fleet is in position. Concord Command must be getting restless. Let them wonder," Voss said. Jareth leaned over, narrowing his gaze at the tactical map. "How long before they make a mistake?" "They already have," Voss murmured. Far below them, humanity's unseen forces were already shifting. The first pawns had moved into play. Tsar felt the first rupture before the alarms even triggered. A flash of white light burst through the void, followed by a violent ripple that slammed into the Vindicator's hull plating. The ship groaned under the stress as the gravitational distortion flickered across their instruments. "Status," Tsar barked. An officer gasped. "Sir, the fleet is scattering," he snapped toward the projection. They had been boxed in. The Vindicator's sensor map twisted, revealing invisible fields now forcing the Concord fleet apart, their formations fracturing like shattered glass. "This isn't a natural phenomenon," Kexisforn's voice cut in from the intelligence deck. "It's engineered." "By who?" Tsar growled. The answer came in the form of silence. Then the first ship vanished. No explosion. No impact. Just gone. A ripple of horror passed through the bridge crew. "What the hell just happened?" an officer gasped. Tsar forced his breathing steady. "Find them. Now." The scanners pulsed, desperately searching for an answer. The ship's comm system buzzed with frantic distress calls from surrounding vessels. Then another ship vanished. A cold terror crept into Tsar's chest. This was not battle. This was erasure. "Sir," a technician whispered, his voice breaking. "We're receiving a transmission." Tsar turned sharply. "From where?" The officer swallowed hard. "It's on all channels." The bridge went silent as a single voice filtered through. Calm, unhurried, human. "You were warned." Tsar's hands clenched into fists. "Send a reply. Now." "No response channel available," the officer stammered. "It's a one-way transmission." Another ripple shook the fleet. Another ship disappeared. Panic spread through the Concord ranks like fire through dry fields. Tsar exhaled sharply, forcing himself into cold calculation. The humans were out here. They were watching. And they had no intention of fighting this war the way Concord had expected. "Activate emergency recall," he ordered. The fleet lurched into emergency retreat, but something shifted in the fabric of space itself. The void did not let go. The bridge lights flickered, energy levels fluctuating erratically. Something unseen was moving between them. Tsar turned toward the viewing panel where the empty abyss stretched before them. For the first time in his career, he did not see space. He saw a graveyard waiting to be filled. The Vindicator lurched as another ripple of energy carved through space, splitting its formation further from the rest of the fleet. On Admiral Valentzar's tactical display, ships flickered out of existence in irregular pulses. No distress beacons, no wreckage, just the cold certainty that they were being dismantled, systematically and invisibly. "This isn't gravitational interference," Director Kexisforn muttered, his knuckles whitening over the console edge. "It's a controlled event." Tsar didn't need the obvious spelled out. His officers worked furiously to regain cohesion, but something in the dark between the stars had already severed them. The recall command had been given, yet the fleet wasn't moving. "Navigation isn't responding," an officer shouted, her fingers clawing at the control. "We're getting feedback loops in the propulsion grid. Something is overriding." A deep vibration coursed through the deck plating, static flickering over comm feeds. Then a voice. "Your recall order is denied." It didn't come from a single transmission. It came from every channel, every frequency, a layered chorus of distortion and finality. It was human. Tsar's throat tightened. The crew around him stilled. "Restore outgoing communications," he ordered. "There's no channel available," Thorne replied, his voice brittle. "They've taken control." A glacial silence spread across the bridge. Tsar turned to the main display, his gaze narrowing. If there was no escape, then there was only one response left. Activate pulse scan. I want a full sweep of this region, he ordered. Track anything that moves. The moment the scan engaged, space itself seemed to react. The display warped, the readings twisting in incomprehensible ways. Data folded over itself, information layered and unreadable. They're blocking sensor feedback, an officer whispered. No, Tsar realized. They weren't blocking anything. They were letting Concord see just enough to know how outmatched they were. Then the final blow landed. Every ship's main display flashed white as a new transmission overrode the fleet's systems. Admiral Rain Voss's face materialized, his expression unreadable. The lighting in the background cast sharp edges against his features. Admiral Tsar, Voss said, his voice as calm as an executioner, reading a verdict. You've traveled far enough. Tsar clenched his jaw. You've already made your point, Voss. What is this? Voss studied him for a moment, then tilted his head slightly. The feed flickered, then shifted to a live transmission of another Concord warship. Tsar recognized it instantly. The Meridian, one of the fleet's heaviest battleships. The crew on board had no idea what was coming. Voss raised a single finger. The Meridian imploded. No explosion, no residual energy waves. Just gone. Tsar's stomach twisted. Enough. If you wanted war, you could have fought one. Voss exhaled through his nose, almost amused. War. This isn't war, Admiral. This isn't war, Admiral. This is intervention. Another ship vanished. The realization settled into Tsar's gut like ice. You want us to run? Voss's expression did not change. No, Admiral. We want you to remember. Tsar never got the chance to reply. The feed cut, and then the real horror began. The Concord capital world. Veltrax Prime. High Chancellor Oval Dornis stood in the Grand Council chamber. His gaze locked onto the projection dominating the room. The Concord fleet's signal had gone dark. Not jammed, not corrupted. Erased. Marshal Utheric Zahn was the first to speak. How many? The intelligence officer barely managed to lift his gaze. All of them. The chamber swelled with voices. Fear, confusion, denial until Dornis slammed his palm against the console. The room fell into silence. This is a trick, he said. A false readout. No, Zahn said coldly. This is a message. Dornis's fingers curled against the armrest. They're not gods. They can bleed. Then tell me, Chancellor. Zahn's voice was barely above a whisper. Where are the bodies? Silence. The truth coiled in the room like a snake waiting to strike. They hadn't lost a battle. They had lost control. And it was only the beginning. In the deep unknown, where no Concord eyes could reach, humanity watched. Voss stood at the heart of the Black Sun Array, the core intelligence station that stretched across the unseen edges of the galactic ray. The artificial station was no war machine. It was something worse, a monument to what humanity had become. Tanner stepped beside him, eyes fixed on the live telemetry feeds. They're unraveling. Voss nodded. They needed to. Jareth Rand leaned against the console. Dornis will retaliate. He'll try, Voss admitted. But he'll find nothing left to fight. Below them, the last of the automated relay probes blinked out of known space. Every trace of their existence, every tactical readout, every fleet movement, vanished. There was no war. There was only the fear of what came next. Voss exhaled, watching the darkness swirl beyond the station's horizon. You were warned, he whispered. And now the galaxy would never forget. Veltrax Prime lay under a heavy silence, the kind that seeped into the bones and refused to leave. The Grand Council chamber was packed with officials, strategists and military officers, yet no one spoke. They stood frozen before the colossal display, where a single, unrelenting transmission looped across every channel. A countdown. Numbers, cold and impersonal, ticking downward. No explanation, no demands, no warning beyond what had already been given. Chancellor Oval Dornis gripped the edge of his podium, his fingers pressing deep into the polished surface. His breath was a quiet tremor beneath the suffocating weight of it all. How do we respond? Someone asked. Marshal Utheric Zahn stared at the numbers, his expression unreadable. We don't. Dornis turned sharply. You're suggesting we do nothing? Jean's gaze remained fixed on the display. There's nothing left to do. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Director Kexis Forn stepped forward, his voice a strained whisper. We've sent everything, every probe, every warship. They all vanish. Dornus clenched his jaw. Then we deploy more. They don't return. The words fell like a death knell. Dornus straightened, smoothing the fabric of his robes with slow deliberation. Then we open negotiation. Jean exhaled, a dry amusement buried beneath his exhaustion. With who, Chancellor? Dornus forced himself to stand taller. With whoever is left. They have leaders. They have purpose. A pause stretched between them, before Jean finally turned and met Dornus's gaze. You still think they need us? Something in the way he said it, so final, so absolute, made the chamber grow colder. The countdown continued. No more ultimatums, no more demands, just time slipping away. At the edge of the unseen, beyond the reach of the known, the black sun array pulsed with quiet, deliberate purpose. Admiral Rain Voss stood before the control panel, watching the last transmissions from Veltrax Prime come through in desperate waves. They had moved past anger, past threat. Now came the bargaining. Too late. Commander Jareth Rand studied the countdown from his station. They think it's a weapon. Tanner's voice filtered through the secured link, dry with amusement. Of course they do. That's all they understand. Voss didn't respond. His eyes followed the dwindling numbers. Rand leaned back, arms folded. So, what happens at 0? The silence stretched, thick with implications. Then the countdown ended. Nothing happened, not in the way the Concord expected. There was no detonation, no grand display of destruction. Instead, Veltrax Prime flickered. For a brief, impossible moment, the entire capital world blinked out of the known spectrum of existence. Not gone, not destroyed, rewritten. The planetary security network collapsed first, then the Deep Space Observatory, then the Galactic Concord's entire knowledge infrastructure. Centuries of records, tactical archives, navigation paths, economic networks, all of it vanished, not stolen, deleted. The largest governing body in the galaxy had been stripped bare. On Veltrax Prime, screens flickered to black. Automated systems shut down in eerie synchronicity. The planet, once the heart of order, now stood blind and disconnected. Dornus's voice was the first to break the silence, trembling beneath his breath. They erased us, not physically, not politically, existential. They had taken the foundation of everything the Concord had built, the laws, the governance, the secrets buried beneath time, all gone. Like humanity had never been part of their history at all. Jean closed his eyes. He understood now. They hadn't been fighting a war. They had been standing trial, and they had been found unworthy. Voss exhaled, watching the finalized purge notification scroll across the display. It's done, Tanner confirmed. Jareth let out a low breath. They'll never recover from this. Voss didn't smile. That was never the point. Jareth turned toward him, brow furrowed. Then what was? Voss stared into the black, where something vast and unknown loomed beyond ordinary comprehension. Evolution, he murmured. Tanner's voice returned, quieter now. What do we do with them? Voss's gaze didn't waver. Nothing. Jareth frowned. They'll try to rebuild. They'll try, Voss agreed. But they won't know where to start, because everything that had once made them powerful, their records, their authority, their understanding of the universe itself, was now beyond their grasp. Humanity had not conquered the Concord. They had done something far worse. They had made them irrelevant. Tanner exhaled. And us? Voss finally turned, stepping away from the panel. We keep moving. Jareth shook his head, almost disbelieving. We left everything behind. There's no turning back after this. Voss met his gaze. Something unreadable lurked beneath his expression. There was never meant to be. Beyond them, the silent expanse stretched onward, infinite and unknowable. Somewhere humanity had already begun again. The Concord would never find them, but the fear of what came next would never leave them.